Sorry everybody, I have to do this one without the glasses because it's nighttime. The reflections were very bad. Anyway, let's get going. Welcome to the video. My name is Mike. I talk about media studies topics, especially as they relate to popular entertainment. I have a soft spot for animation. I talk about that quite a bit, as well as video games and a few other things. And today I want to get back to my roots, the real roots of the channel, because if you don't know, the original point of GL, the full name is Glitterati Lobotomy. The concept was to try to make fancy art house movies specifically feel more accessible to more people. I was trying to remove the stigma of like, oh, those are fancy movies. Those are for people who have studied film or like people who have money to go to film festivals in the south of France. That was the thing. I didn't end up making a ton of videos on that topic, but long story short, I still have a real passion for that and trying to get more people to watch these excellent movies that are generally considered obscure by mainstream standards and also typically considered kind of boring. And in this video, I am going to suggest some ways that you can start to enjoy boring movies. And before we really get going, I need to make it clear that when I use the phrase boring movies, what I really mean is movies that happen to have very slow pacing, because these days anything with slow pacing is generally considered boring by mainstream audiences. But I think that there's a big difference between slow pacing and actual boring movies, which are just storytelling that has zero interest to it. But that distinction kind of speaks to the core issue here. I want to make a case for why you should explore slow-paced movies and maybe discover that while they might be slow, they're actually not boring at all. And if you manage to make that discovery, then you will unlock a whole new category of movie watching that delivers something entirely unique and almost mystical. I was trying to think back to how I got into boring movies originally, or slow movies, rather, as I'll call them. And I pinned down the exact moment that it happened. I was in a college class. I forget the name of the class exactly, but I definitely remember the professor. He was quite a character. And we watched a whole lot of slow movies in this class, but the very first of them all was a movie called Gerry. And I can already see the film geeks nodding their heads out there. This is a Gus Van Sant directed movie from 2002, starring Casey Affleck and Matt Damon. It's an indie movie to the max, and even by low budget movie standards, it was still a big flop. It cost about $3.5 million to make and only made back like $250,000, so it really didn't do very well. It's about two guys who get lost in the desert, very badly lost, to the point where they're just trying to survive. But don't worry, the story isn't really important to this video. It's an okay story, but here's what is important. Gerry is an extremely slow movie. It's not crazy long in terms of runtime. It's about 1 hour and 40 minutes, I think. But when you're in this movie and you're committed to it, it feels like you've been there your whole life. It just feels so incredibly long, and that feeling is created through a combination of many different filmmaking choices. So there's the setting of the movie itself, which is the desert, and it's mostly absent of anyone other than our lead characters for the whole thing. It's a very desolate setting. Then there's the soundtrack. The movie does have a musical score, but it's incredibly sparse. And then pulling most of the weight are the cinematography and the editing. So I'll have to check on this, but I heard that the movie has a total of about 100 shots. Now, for comparison, the average movie of about the same runtime has roughly 1,000 shots. So with the runtime of this movie being roughly 100 minutes, it's not hard to work out the average shot length, which is, roughly 1 minute each. Some shots are shorter, some shots are much, much longer. And if you are a cinephile or if you've done any filmmaking yourself, then you know just how crazy that is. For one thing, it's really difficult to execute, but it's also very hard to maintain the audience's attention through very long takes. But guess what? Going back to that class, when we were all watching this movie in class, there was a natural progression. One by one, we all settled into the groove. Maybe it was made easier by our situation because, watching a movie in a class is a lot easier than like following along with a discussion or doing some kind of actual work. So it wasn't that hard to just sit there and watch. We were forced to, more or less. And plenty of us were also pretentious college students, meaning we really liked looking at things that we hadn't seen before. We were hungry for that kind of stuff. But I'm not here to argue that Jerry is a good movie. It's definitely special to me, but that's because of how it served as a gateway to my enjoyment of other boring movies and the realization that they weren't actually boring. In that same class, in fact, we also watched a movie called Werckmeister Harmonies from directors Agnes Hranitsky, just a guess at pronunciation, and a guy called Bela Tarr. For reference, Tarr has another movie called Satan Tango, which has a runtime of about 7.5 hours. Werckmeister, on the other hand, is a mere 2.5 hours, so easy breezy. And it's rare that I remember every little thing that happens in a slow movie, but I'm basically guaranteed to remember the movie's tone and atmosphere. Werckmeister Harmonies feels like drowning in chocolate pudding. You know that you're gonna be sinking for days on end, and there's nothing you can do about it. There's no way out. And in that same class, man, was that a treasure trove for being introduced to this kind of stuff. We also watched 2 movies from the legendary Soviet director Andrei Tarkovsky, The Mirror and Stalker. Stalker, by the way, is free on YouTube. The whole thing. I don't know why. It's just there. You can just watch it. And I think that those 2 movies and Werckmeister, they're all slow, and they all happen to be masterpieces, in my opinion anyway. And they're not masterpieces because they're slow. And also, not every movie that has slow pacing is a masterpiece. I think that Jerry is the case in point there. But the pacing of these movies is an essential component of their greatness. So, based on that, let's try to reverse engineer this. If we want to know how to enjoy slow movies, and I should describe why I enjoy watching them. For me, very deliberate, slow pacing enhances immersion. Once I'm invested in the movie, that pacing forces me to stay invested. It forces me to pay close attention to small details. If I'm looking at a shot that it's holding on for like 3 minutes, I am going to notice those details. I'm going to look for the smallest changes and consider the composition of the frame. I'm not just observing, I'll also start to analyze it, which is typically something that I only want to do after actually finishing a movie. So with something much faster paced, more typical, like, I don't know, an action movie or like a kid's movie or a comedy, the viewer isn't usually given enough time to think about things as they happen. You're given just enough time to understand the surface level elements, and then the movie just kind of moves on to the next thing. It keeps a brisk pace. And this brings up something that I've said about slow pacing here on the channel several times before in talking about all kinds of different things, is that it really gives you room to think. And I appreciate that so much. I really enjoy thinking. In fact, it's probably how I spend most of my time. I'm guessing you're the same way. And when a piece of media gives me room to think, it also gives the impression that the creators behind it are very confident in their work. They want you to engage. They're not trying to hide what might be some of the weaker aspects. It's kind of like the difference between, the one person who gives like a really detailed, well-prepared speech or presentation, and at the end of it, they leave 10 minutes for audience questions. And then you have this other person who gives like a very hasty, shallow speech, and then they say, "Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, look at that. No time for questions. I'm gonna leave now." One of those speeches, it gives you a stronger impression that they're really confident in what they were able to put together. And all of these things, all of these elements combine into a unique movie watching experience. Watching and enjoying a slow movie doesn't feel quite like anything else. And maybe this is a stretch, but if you're in the right mood and watching the right movie, it can kind of feel like a hypnotic state. Everything else just drops away. I'm not worried about like checking my phone or what I need to make for dinner later. Temporarily, my world is the world of the movie. And even if the movie is like a horror story or it's kind of disturbing, I'm happy to be there. How can you get to that place where you're happy to be watching a slow movie and you're actually enjoying yourself rather than just thinking, man, they need to pick up the pace? Well, this is where I'm going to get slightly YouTubey. I have a list of tips for you, and after that, I'm going to recommend some slow movies that I happen to like a whole lot. Okay, the first thing is to give yourself the time for one of these movies. No matter what the slow movie is that you have your sights set on, it's very easy to find the run time before you actually sit down to watch it. That way you can kind of plan. So I don't recommend throwing on one of these slow movies when you're trying to get some work done. We're not trying to do any like background viewing here. Don't start the movie when you're getting ready to like rush out the door to go play mini golf. And by the way, don't feel like you have to watch the movie, the whole thing, in just one sitting. I think that watching a whole movie at once is preferable a lot of the time, but depending on like your schedule or just some difficulties you might have with concentrating for long periods of time, it just might not be possible. So go ahead and split it up if you need to. The second thing, reducing distractions, pretty self-explanatory, I think. In a similar vein, give your brain the space that it needs to really get invested in the movie. If you tend to check your phone a whole lot, maybe turn it off or just leave it somewhere on the other side of the room where you're going to be too lazy to go up and get it. If you live on a busy street, maybe close the curtains. Don't try to play a game on your Switch when the movie's on. Basically, try to treat it as a movie night. You can get some snacks and bring out the good blanket and turn the lights off. And this might be a controversial suggestion to some, but try to watch a slow movie on your own. It can be great having a film buddy, but if the other person isn't in the mood for a slow movie or they're just not interested in trying them out at all, then they're going to resist, which isn't going to be fun for anybody. Most people just aren't used to these kinds of movies, and you don't want to force them into anything. Okay, the third thing, accept it. So maybe you've made it like 20 minutes into a slow movie, but you're starting to panic. This feels different from what you're used to. Your mind is starting to wander. Clearly, it's not going well. It's just not clicking with you. Now, there are a couple of different possibilities here. The first one is that you just don't like this particular movie. It's just not your thing for whatever reason. I get it. And I don't recommend this all the time, but giving up on a movie midway is completely fair. I've done it plenty of times, especially when I was a younger person with an active social life and I was going to do other things. But the other possibility here is that you're just in that transitional period. You're in the process of learning to like something new. Slow movies are ultimately an acquired taste, as much as I hate to say it. And like other acquired tastes, your feelings might change over time. You can try to brute force your way into liking something, or you can leave and come back much later and see how you feel. The example I'll use here in relation to my own experience with this is the movie Close Up. Now, this is an art house classic, one of my personal favorites, but let's ignore all that for now, shove that aside. The movie is generally very slow, and the beginning in particular is kind of bland. When I first tried to watch this movie, I really struggled with it. I was maybe 10 minutes in when I just said nope. Like, I was bored, I didn't want to read subtitles, and there were other things that I wanted to be doing with my time. I did not come back to this movie for, I don't know, 5 years, probably more. But when I came back, it worked. The movie was more closely aligned with how I felt. And part of that was just my mood on the day itself, but another part was how I had changed during those 5 years. I don't think that I could say that I was like a better person and that had anything to do with it. I don't think that was it, but I was definitely more patient, and I had a greater appreciation for moments of calm and quiet. And not only did I manage to finish the movie that time, but I loved it. I found myself rewinding to some of the best scenes, and I've rewatched it now plenty of times. It's fantastic. So it could go either way. You might decide pretty definitively that slow movies just aren't for you, but you also might realize that this special kind of enjoyment requires some effort. It's not like the standard movie-viewer relationship where the viewer just sits there and waits to be entertained by the movie. Instead, in this case, the viewer is much more involved. There's a certain level of participation between the viewer and the movie. And liking slow movies does not make you more or less of a cinephile, by the way. This is just a particular category of movies, or rather a category of movie pacing. Some people like it, some don't. That's fine. All right, so here at the end, I just wanted to recommend some titles that I would definitely place in the category of slow movies. Now, some of these are harder to find than others. I will try to list where they're currently available for streaming, at least here in North America, but as we all know, that availability could change at any time. Okay, starting out, I already mentioned Werckmeister Harmony's Stalker and The Mirror. They are all recommended. But beyond that, we've got, what do we got? We have Paris, Texas. It's a German and French film about the American Southwest, starring Harry Dean Stanton, God rest his soul. He plays a man who is turned up after disappearing for 4 years, I think. And after that, things happen. Fantastic cinematography and some killer scenes that evoke live theater in a way. It's a classic. Sweetgrass, much more recent. One of my favoritist documentaries. It's about sheep herding. There's no voiceover, no one telling you what's happening or the significance of these events. You're just there. The filmmakers try really hard to put you in these spaces. And lucky for you, these spaces are pretty fantastic. Drive My Car, a very recent one, working with themes of loss, grief, and recovery. It's a starkly quiet movie with a fantastic soundtrack and scenes that just hit me like sandbags. Cold War, this is a Polish film, Oscar-winning director Paweł Pawlikowski, I think. And it's about two people trying to maintain a relationship despite physical distance, political upheaval, and, totalitarian oppression. It's not an easy romp, but it definitely puts its punch in the right places. Three Colors, Blue, the first movie of a trilogy from Kieślowski, famous Polish-French director, and it's the best movie. We found it. Here it is. This is the best movie. Now you know. Go ahead and take a look. Jean Dielman, and the rest of the name, which I am not going to pronounce because I forget how to say all my numbers in French. Excellent. Named my cat after this movie. It was filmed by a crew of only women, which was actually pretty challenging back in the 70s. And yeah, it's a masterpiece about a woman doing chores and also other things. And lastly, Where is the Friend's House? Another movie from the same director of Close Up. This is about a kid trying to give a classmate the homework that he left at school. And by the way, there's a shot in here that's referenced directly in the Darjeeling Limited, if you're into that kind of thing. Wes has taste, even if he's choosing to stagnate for most of his career. And we're done. I hope that I've given you some useful tools and suggestions, and who knows, even if you're not really into the idea of slow movies right now, you might be sometime in the future, long after I'm gone, long time after. Be sure to leave a legacy like. And that's all for now. Thanks for stopping by.